Welcome to the Ambulatory Healthcare Today podcast, hosted by NextGen Healthcare. Accelerate your success with insights from a multidisciplinary team of healthcare experts as they discuss an array of topics. These timely discussions can help you better navigate the challenges of running your ambulatory care practice. Here is your host.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ambulatory Healthcare Today podcast. Our show is hosted by members of the NextGen Healthcare community. My name is Mohammed Chebli. I'm Vice President of Product Management for Interoperability here at NextGen Healthcare. And I'm joined today by my colleague and good friend, Curtis Bailey, who's our Senior Solutions Engineer. And he works especially on our Interop products, including Mirth Connect and all of our Mirth and Interop solutions. I'm sure as many of you know, interoperability is one of our core competencies and one of our key specialties. And we're really excited about today's conversation because of how important Interop is in healthcare, for providers, for patients, and really the entire care community. And here at NextGen, we talk about interoperability a lot because it's so central to our EHR and to our Mirth business. We often say that Interop is a lot like plumbing. So Curtis, I know that's a phrase that you've really coined and championed. So what makes interoperability so similar to plumbing in your mind?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, you don't really think about the water flowing out of your tap until it doesn't flow, right? If you got up in the morning and you went to brush your teeth and you turned the tap on and there was no water there, that's the first time you would think about it and go, what happened? When did the water get turned off, right? Interoperability is really the same way. The only time you really think about it is when the data is not flowing, right? And that's the biggest pain point for a lot of people out there, right? You think about, we had this with my daughter. We went to the hospital, and in the same building that my daughter was born in, we went to our pediatrician. And one system uses Epic, one system uses Athena, and yet how many times did I have to fill out the same form that said, okay, here's my insurance, here's my, this and that, who's the next of kin, who's the guarantor, all of that kind of data. I put it in Epic. I had it in my chart. I put it in, this one, that one. Everywhere I go, I have to do that. And it's, for a lot of lay people, they look at it and say, you're in the same building. Why don't my records just move, right? We're just so used to this connectivity in our lives that just happens. It just flows. The water just flows wherever it needs to go. And so, here at NextGen, that's our goal, is to be the humble plumbers of healthcare data, right? That, when you open your tap, the data is there, that you can get the water or data that you need and make that outcome. At the end of the day, that's what we're all about, is outcomes. We want patients to have a good outcome with the healthcare system.
Yeah, absolutely. And not to stretch the metaphor too far, but, it's a lot like a utility, right? It's a utility like our electricity, obviously our water, our roads. These are things we absolutely depend on and rely on. And in the healthcare ecosystem, Interop is a lot like that. We have to ship this data from systems that have it to systems that need it so that patients, providers, other care team members can access it. And then hopefully at the end of the day, we can all benefit from this data, right? We can learn from the outcomes of all of the activities that have happened in the healthcare system. So Interop, obviously super essential to providers, patients, all these different care settings. But here we are kind of halfway through 2025, Curtis. Interop has been, top of mind concern for providers for, 10, 15 years. It's been in the ether and talked about as a huge major challenge. But here we are halfway through 2025. What's new in Interop today? FHIR's been released. We've got APIs, but what's happening today that you think providers and health IT vendors, technologists, what should we be focused on in this Interop landscape right now where we are?
Well, I think, FHIR has been around for a long time. And it's funny because I have this little stuffed animal that sits on my desk he's a little Dalmatian. He has a little neckerchief that says HL7 FHIR. And I got that, I think, at the 2014 HIMSS conference. So almost 10 years ago was really kind of when the big bang coming out party for HL7 FHIR was. And everybody at the time told me, oh, we're never going to need to use HL7 2.x ever again. And CCDs are a thing of the past. And HL7 FHIR is going to revolutionize it. And honestly, I'm still a true believer. I think it is going to revolutionize healthcare. But as we know, all things in healthcare move slowly, like glaciers, right? Just slowly coming down the mountain. Eventually, we'll get to the sea, right? And so fire is huge. But one thing we know about the industry, and look, we work for NextGen, we work in interoperability, but we also have this thing called an EHR, kind of a side business that we do. It's a joke. It's our main business, right? And interoperability is the side business at the end of the day, right? And, EHRs in general don't move until regulatory pressures push them to. And so, we saw in Cures, hey, you need to have a Fire API. But just like when Direct was implemented, the only reason people had to do Direct was so that they could move a CCD. And that's all EHRs implemented, right? I remember being an early implementer of direct messaging back in the day, and we used to send test messages to systems with no CCD attached just to see what they would do. And a good percentage of them, unfortunately, did nothing, right? Because the mandate from the federal government said you have to be able to accept a CCD via direct. And full stop, that's where they ended, right? And Fire's the same way. You have to be able to do it for patient access purposes. And that's where most have stopped. I'm really looking forward to when we expand that out to be more than that. But even then, I don't know that Fire today covers all the use cases you'd want to use for an API. And so we're starting to see more expansion in more of the proprietary API sets for EHRs. We do that here at NextGen. We have a proprietary API set that does more things like workflow around billing and workflow around, prior authorization and those kinds of workflows, things like that, that honestly, I don't know that you're ever really going to have a lot of use cases around in Fire. And that's okay. I think the biggest thing is let's push everybody towards APIs, whether they're Fire, proprietary, or anything. I just look forward to the day when I don't have to think about MLLP anymore.
Yeah, leaving behind, I think what you're touching on is like, there's been a lot of ways to do interop, right? Historically, some that have worked really well. You talk about direct messaging, adding attachments, supporting a wide variety of documents. And now with Fire, you've got vendors who are building apps for patients, for connecting new services and new capabilities that EHRs don't typically provide. So EHRs have stood up these marketplaces and other mechanisms to help organizations connect, access data, and share data. You touched a little bit on some of the drivers for this, right? Like it started off being that interop was a thing we as an industry and as providers had to do to check the box for regulatory, right? As part of meaningful use, getting the incentive payments for, the programs like MIPS and MACRA and other things that followed meaningful use. Those same incentives still exist, like do interop to avoid a penalty or do interop to get an incentive payment. But in my experience, providers quickly transitioned from simply doing these things for the purpose of, avoiding a penalty. That's really transitioned to doing it because it's the right thing to do. It's easy. And importantly, it's valuable and meaningful, not in the meaningful use sense, but meaningful in the actual definition of the word. It's helpful. It adds something to the care. It improves outcomes. And I think we have seen in this, last few years, a real shift from interop just being a have to do kind of thing, check the box, to being absolutely a mission critical, essential part of care, where if those transactions to query and retrieve data, or if the API didn't get any info, providers notice, patients notice. And now it's become a major point of friction. If you show up to a visit and the provider doesn't have your data, it's a major dissatisfier for patients and providers alike.
It's now a differentiator, right? I mean, honestly, this right here, being able to just grab the data is amazing, right? And I wish it was a little bit more of an open ecosystem that you could bring data from other systems together, or if there was a killer app that brought it all together. I mean, I think there's been a lot of starts and stops in that, but that's, we expect that, right? I have my Facebook and I have OpenID and all of these different things where I can have, my data just flows wherever it is. And if you're in the Apple ecosystem, it's the same way with HealthKit, right? Everything that's on my watch is now in my phone, which is in the cloud, which is now with my provider. It's, fairly
Yeah, it's a night
seamless.
and day difference. And you talked about kind of your daughter and kind of the experience of accessing data on behalf of, patients that we care about, patients in our family. And I'm so happy to see how far Interop has grown over recent years. You talk about MyChart and EHR centric apps, but now patients really have a wealth of options, between kind of like the native uh, operating system providers like Apple and Android have first class support now for Fire APIs for patients to access their data. And that's such a huge win for patients everywhere, not just in one EHR ecosystem, but practically on any EHR, including NextGen EHR providers, fully accessible across all of those APIs. It's a huge win, isn't it?
It's an interesting thing because, I do a lot of work with Mirth Connect here at NextGen. And you would think that with Mirth Connect that, 80% of our business would be hospitals and doctors' offices. But it's not. I would say probably 70% of our business is with health IT vendors, right? I've built a widget that does XYZ, and I need a way to get data from your EHR or back into the EHR with the data that I've crunched. I've built some new AI thing. I've built some better mousetrap for whatever it may be. Maybe it's a personal health record. Maybe it's a billing workflow or a pre-auth workflow, or, the one that we see all the time is like you can't throw a rock at HIMSS and not find someone that's not doing something that's similar to the AI that's built into NextGen EHR with the ambient assist, where it's doing dictation and taking notes for providers. But, the key to that is everybody can do that. The AI is kind of almost commoditized at this point. It's about how you get that integration back into the EHR, right? So that I just end the call and I press a button and it just does the SOAP note and puts it right into the chart. That's the killer app, is that interoperability between the AI and the EHR, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know it wouldn't be 2025 without mentioning AI and its relationship to interop. So I'm really glad you brought that up. But you brought up something that's just as exciting for me, which is Mirth Connect, right? And I think our listeners and a lot of folks who follow Mirth and NextGen, they've seen us make a lot of updates recently to Mirth Connect. And a big one recently is our commercial change, right? Our pivot to our enterprise license. And I know a lot has gone into that. And so, Curtis, can you take a minute and just kind of talk about like what that pivot was all about and what recently we've done and what's new with Mirth Connect and your conversations with prospects and customers?
Yeah, when you think about the history of Mirth Connect, we started roughly 2005. We started as an open source project, and we built a lot of interoperability across the world, to be completely honest, at a really great price called free. And eventually, down the line, we have to look at things like sustainability. And a lot of different open source projects have had to look at this, right? And it's something that you and I talked about a number of months ago, is that, open source is a really interesting thing. And there's a lot of open source out there where it's really great stuff. There's that great YXCD or whatever.
XKCD.
Yeah, that it's like this one little block that's just some guy in Iowa that's maintaining, that holds up this entire, monolith of technology. And in many cases, that's what Mirth Connect was. And part of the problem is that, a lot of people were using it and not contributing back to it. Now, there are vibrant communities in open source. When we look at Linux, who has, thousands of contributing developers, right? Mirth Connect, how many contributing developers did we have besides people who worked and wore a NextGen logo on their shirt? Not quite as many. And so
when you mean contributing developers, I think what you're getting at is like writing code that gets distributed as part of the final kind of release, and contributing that code such that it's part of that final build. In an open source world, developers all over the world can contribute code and update it. And I think there are a lot of different kind of patterns to open source communities. Yes, like the Linux community, where folks write code and distribute that code, broadly. And you've got contributions all over the place. Where the Mirth community in the open source era, I think, was really focused on kind of implementers, right? Open source implementers, and channel development and all of that. And this pivot, I think, has given us an opportunity to kind of perhaps, shape that community slightly to have a more direct relationship with our end users, right? Introducing this enterprise license allows us to have a support relationship, potentially a hosting relationship, obviously a software release and development relationship with all of our end users. So
And I
how do
don't
you
want to
think this
minimize the
changes?
contributions of the community. I mean, we've had a lot of really great, ideas. Hey, it would be really cool if Mirth could do this, and
Yeah.
many of them made them into the product. But I think, from a development perspective, we always had more ideas than we had time, money, and resources to implement, right? and that's always hard, right? Because we all deal with that in our lives. It's resource management. That's what being an adult is resource management, and that's what we
Yeah.
do all
So
day.
we've recently made this change to this enterprise license, and this change obviously introduced some questions from our open source users. What's changing with Mirth? What's different about this new release, and how does this change impact existing open source users? So maybe can you take a minute and kind of just talk about that open source user experience and what is new for them in 4.6, and why should people even consider coming with us in this new era to the enterprise license and to the 4.6 release? Like, how would you talk to an open source user who's been on the product for 10 or 12 years, or even longer perhaps, and what value do they get out of 4.6?
Everything that was under open source is still out there on GitHub. If you're on 4.5.2 today, it's still out there, still open source. There are forks out there. People have taken it and done modifications to it, and that exists out there. But there is the new commercial release. One of the biggest, and with that 4.5.2, you can stay on it as long as you want, right? There's not, other than maybe some security things that may be discovered down the road. I mean, it is a year-old release, to be completely honest. So that's one thing to maybe think about is the security vulnerabilities that all software have and are eventually remediated. That's the part of having maintained software is you remediate those security issues. But, you don't have to make the decision absolutely today. You do have to make it soon, but it's not like if you don't do it tomorrow, it's going to stop working.
Haven't we heard such stories of like organizations staying on Mirth Connect?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because I'm speaking to its stability, its performance,
Mm-hmm.
its rock solid nature, right? Like we've heard examples of folks having production servers that have not been turned off or had any downtime for consistent use across years, right?
Well,
Three,
there's
4
the anecdotal story of the one hospital that actually walled in the server, right? So it was running, I think, 3.2, Mirth 3.2. So that's a long time ago. That's 10-ish years ago, right? But they had a server in a closet. They did some remodeling. The drywall guy came in and put his drywall in. No one knew where this server actually was. It turns out it was kind of drywalled into a closet somewhere, right? Just worked.
Like that. It's like that core infrastructure story, right? Nobody remembers it, but everybody relies on it. And
right.
Yeah. So to your point, we've released now 4.6, right? We've even put out now 4.6.1, if I'm not mistaken, a patch to that enterprise license release. And so to your point, the releases continue to move, right? And we're continuing to put out new code, new capabilities, new updates. And so if you do stay on a legacy or an older version that has not yet been updated, you should be thinking about those security, gaps. Like what are the capabilities you don't have? So if you're on an old version, you probably don't have multi-factor authentication. You probably don't have user access controls. There are a lot of things that you might be potentially missing,
right,
that your security folks will care about and will want to remediate. And so what else comes with 4.6, Curtis? Like what other beyond just being like, up to date and having, all of these like MFA and other capabilities, what other things from a security perspective should folks be thinking about for 4.6?
Well, I mean, I think the other thing is that now there is a required support relationship, like you said. And, that's always something that we talked about with the open source group. We had a lot of people that use open source and they have a question. And your option was to go to the forum, go to the Slack channel, post in there. And hope and pray that somebody has had the same issue that you did, and that once they fixed it, they came back and posted and said, oh, I typed in this command and it did the thing and it made it work for me. Great. Everybody's happy. Right. But, if that wasn't the case and it's 3:00 in the morning and this is now a production issue for you, sure would be great to call somebody in, Irvine, California, who could pick up the phone and go, hey, Mo, I see you're having a problem. Let's see if we can't get that fixed for you, right? So first and foremost, I think support is a big thing. It changes the paradigm that you're not reliant on the community and the whims of the community. We're fully staffed 365 days a year, 24/7, robust, smart people, probably smarter than me people, definitely smarter than me people who can help you with whatever it may be. Now, the other thing you talked about is there's added functionality that, you get SSL encryption right off the bat. So if you want to make a connection to an API or an HL7 Fire server or anything like that, we have SSL encryption built right into that base level version. There's a thing called the channel history plugin. And channel history is interesting because this has never happened in anybody's professional career, but let's say you updated an interface and you may or may not have broke that interface. Like I said, it's never happened to anybody, never happened to me because I'm perfect. Right? But in the case that it did happen to you, you might want to revert back to a previous version, go back to the last save point in video game parlance, right? And try again before you take on the boss battle. The other one is, it allows us to do HL7 message generation. So if you're testing an HL7 type interface, you can create test messages on the fly that you can use to test those. And we look at that honestly as base functionality. We never included that in the open source version because we had to make a delineation. But now we look at that as table stakes. That is base functionality that needs to be in the interface engine.
Can we touch on that just a little bit, Curtis? Because I think there's an important kind of call out for folks that we've always had from inception of Mirth Connect, a dual license approach. We had your open source, which was available for free, available to anyone everywhere. And we also had our commercial license products for Mirth. So from day one, Mirth was always dual licensed, commercial and open source. And I think you touched on something that goes a little bit unsaid in the open source world, which is sometimes the developers have an incentive to focus their efforts on the commercial capabilities. And historically, just knowing, I've been here for 12 plus years, you've been here for a long time as well. We've seen our attention being focused on those commercial capabilities and sometimes leaving the core of the product, right, without added features. Why? Because when you have a dual license, you're always competing against your own free option, right? As you're competing or selling the commercial solution against other vendors. And so we sometimes struggle to include those core.
Right. 4.5 was a huge release for us where it was almost 90% security updates.
Yeah.
And, a little bit but inside baseball is that at that point in time, we had an idea that we were going to move to a commercial only license structure. And
it's always been there in the ether, right?
Right.
Every open source product responsibly has to and should evaluate its license at all moments, at every juncture, right? Not at maybe every release per se, but you have to regularly evaluate your release patterns. And I think you touched on this earlier. We've seen examples and have been subject to other open source license changes for products that we use internally, for products we use commercially. Their licenses change all the time, or change in a sufficient enough frequency that it's a thing we care about and pay attention to. So how should our end users think about this change now that we've gone to enterprise, now that we have this direct support relationship, now that we're hopefully introducing more capabilities core and into the product? Like, what do you think our customers, our prospects should expect from us in our future kind of Mirth Connect releases, like now that we've made this change?
Well, I don't want to be like the salesy shield, right? But I look at it as a good thing. It allows us to focus on the functionality that our customers want and need, right? First and foremost, more and more focus on the core platform, including maintaining its stability and its track record of stability. The greatest compliment our developers ever got was the fact that someone said in the forums, I didn't even bother putting it in tests. I knew your release was going to be rock solid, and I went straight to production, which I'm not advising you do that. Let me be very clear. But it is a compliment that we have such rock solid builds, right? In that, and we want to continue to maintain that. But beyond that, it's, hey, we want to make new and cool things that fix interoperability problems, right? And that's what our roadmap looks like, is things like maybe down the road, AI integration, right? Maybe a channel builder where you talk about it conversationally. Hey, I have a port or an MLLP connection over TCP/IP that's going to be on this port. It's going to bring in an HL7 feed that is blah, 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 and I want it to filter it this way. Like, that would be amazing. And those are the things we want to focus on, are being able to take the platform that is rock solid and continue to keep it rock solid, but innovate, right? Maybe we start with something that's an API explorer, and that it has pre-documented connectors for Epic and Cerner and for, insert name that's not standards based, like their proprietary IP or API set. There's just so many places we want to go with it. And this allows us the latitude to do that innovation without having to worry about some of these other pieces that were a part of open source.
So speaking about innovation, one thing I'd like to touch on, because it's a new feature that I'm super excited about, and it's in 4.6. So it's immediately available to customers everywhere. Well, almost everywhere, which we'll talk about in a second too. Command Center. So we've recently introduced, as part of 4.6, this new capability, long-standing request from all of our users around this challenge of managing a fleet of Mirth Connect servers, right? Usually small organizations can sometimes get by with, one production server. Maybe you've got, a high availability environment where you're failing over. But sometimes you have a need for managing multiple deployments, right? You've got an edge and you've got, a hub and spoke model. Perhaps you've got deployments out in the wild. And so
Front
managing
broker,
a
rear
fleet,
broker, right?
exactly. Yeah. And so managing a fleet of servers has always been a challenge. Can you talk a little bit about Command Center? So just like you talked about, kind of like long horizon things we might do, but like, let's talk about what we've released and what is immediately available now, and what you think the response has been to Command Center for folks who aren't familiar with it.
Yeah, I mean, so first and foremost today, when we look at Command Center, it's in its infancy and we have big plans for it. But today it's a centralized pane of glass where you can manage multiple Mirth Connects, right? So you can have your test Mirth Connect, your prod Mirth Connect. You can have one that's in the cloud, in your cloud, in our cloud, in someone else's cloud, deployed at a customer's site, deployed centrally in, a cloud service provider like AWS, Amazon, Google, right? But from one pane of glass, you can see all of your interfaces. Are they up? Are they down? Do they have thumbs up, thumbs to the side, thumbs down, red, yellow, green kind of thing? Statistics, reporting, right? And that's the baseline. Is the minimum should be things like reporting. Is the interface up? How many messages is it processing? Those kinds of things. Down the road, a lot of other things like starting and stopping interfaces, maybe being able to promote something from test to prod automatically without having to log into that instance, those two instances of Mirth Connect. Those are all kind of future facing kind of statements, to be clear. But today it's, one pane of glass to see all of your Mirth Connects, get statistics and statuses on them. In the future, it'll be much more. But we know that there are huge implementations of Mirth Connect out there. I had a meeting with a group that is a major EHR vendor out there, that they have 20 production Mirth Connect servers that are running open source. And they use that as a backbone for the interoperability for their EHR. And it does things like care quality integration. It does, your regular lab integration. They connect to HIEs. They connect to, all over the world, all of the gamut of capabilities that Mirth Connect can do. But today for them, it's a management problem in that, if you have 20 production servers, oh man, I got to have a lot of documentation. I got to know that interface is on this server at
And
this
you need
IP address.
really strong change control policies, just operationally as a business, as an organization, to manage and to control and to sustain that over many years in time and updates. And so I think Command Center, just to be clear, when you talk about pane of glass, we're talking about a web portal where folks can, even though Mirth Connect could be installed maybe on-site, on-premise, or up in the cloud, you mentioned AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, regardless, name your cloud provider. Regardless of where Mirth Connect is installed, Command Center has the ability to connect to that environment, aggregate the stats, the message traffic, the channel configs, and then show that on the portal so that admins, a client admin, can evaluate that environment and better understand what's going on. And so it gives us a lot of capability. And importantly, I love the fact, a lot like Mirth Connect as a product itself, it's a tool that we also use. So before we made Command Center available, and I love inside baseball stuff sometimes, right? But like before we released Command Center, so for all of our listeners, before we made it available as part of the 4.6 release, it was first an internal tool for us, our support team, our hosting team, to manage what we called at the time Mirth Cloud Connect, now Mirth Fully Managed. It was a tool for us to manage our managed service of Mirth Connect,
which happened to be a bunch of cloud deployments, and we went,
hey, all bunch of cloud deployments, exactly. And so like,
we went, hey, some of our customers look a lot like this. They might want to use this tool too.
Yeah, and I don't know, something about being in product myself, like to get to build a product that we use internally, and we also commercialize and make available for others, right? So we solve a problem for us. Guess what? It's the same problem everyone else is trying to solve too. And I just love that when those two things can come together. Interop is such a universal need, right? As an EHR, we have to provide interop for our customers. And then, of course, our clients are trying to provide interop for their end users in the Mirth universe as well. So it's so like synergistic, to use a silly business cliche term, but it is nice to have us building a product that we use and then we also commercialize.
Yeah. And the other thing I would say is that the other thing that we really wanted to foster with Mirth Connect, and we were very careful of in the transition, is that we know that Mirth Connect is used a lot of times in research, right? And like, I mean, I know you have a number of different studies where showing, hey, we pulled data out of these EHRs and we put it in a database and we figured these things out. And we wanted to ensure that we continued to foster that. So one thing I do want to talk about is that there is a license tier that is free, no charge, no cost, if it's for a legitimate research purpose, right? And so if you're
part of how have we defined that? How have we defined legitimate research purpose, Chris? So talk a little bit about like this Mirth Connect for research and what we explicitly mean by researchers.
Well, I mean, I think I think the research is a very broad definition, right? So, we have to be very careful with that, because, that's one thing I always joke about, is a lot of people forget about the research part of research and development, right? They just think of development, but there's a lot of research that goes into, will this tool do the thing that we want it to do that we can then develop around, right? But I think we're talking more around kind of more academic type research, right? And even it would extend to probably like public health departments and, like the federal government, if they were doing things like, hey, we're trying to understand how many people have type 1 diabetes in this population, and we're going to use Mirth to gather that data and put it into a big database or an API or some platform.
What I love about this Mirth Connect for research is not some like unusual, abnormal process for us or for researchers. So before this pivot, we have seen and continue to see roughly about 30 studies a year that are published in academic papers, in scientific journals all over the world that explicitly rely on Mirth Connect for the data access part of that research study. So at a minimum, there are 30 of these studies every year since roughly about 2011, 2012. This has been consistent. And we want to encourage that. We want to continue that and not put a hold to that or halt to that as we've made this enterprise pivot. So Mirth Connect continues to be free for researchers all over the world, so long as you're affiliated with a bona fide research institution, and importantly, that it's a non-commercial research. So if you're using it for an internal study in your company to collect data, and it's for improving your kind of product or offering, it's not really intended for that kind of research, but it is for scientific studies that are going to be published in peer-reviewed or scientific journals and affiliated, importantly, with a nonprofit bona fide research institution. Mirth Connect will continue to be free for those researchers all over the world. And that's definitely a way I felt like we could give back, honor that legacy of open source, and continue to provide, a pattern and a way for people to access the product at no charge when it can be useful for that research. Curtis, I want to touch on, we talked about Command Center, but I know, and I think you know, that we have right now a limit on Command Center, right? Today, it's only available, I believe, in the US. I want to just mention to folks who might be interested that we have talked about and are exploring, how we can make Command Center available in other geographies, Europe and the UK, and other places. We want to make sure we're in full compliance with all of the privacy regulations on data collection before we do that. But we're working with our privacy and our security teams and our legal teams to make sure we meet and exceed all of those local requirements internationally as well as in the US.
I mean, and then I've been helping with that effort, and it's one thing that I've learned that a lot of people just like to say, kind of wave GDPR around, and to be completely honest, a lot of the privacy regulations across the world have a basis in what the European Union did with GDPR, but they're all completely different, right? And it's because this paragraph got changed or that paragraph got changed. I mean, the one saving grace here in the US is that because we have privacy regulations here. We obviously have HIPAA. We have things that came in 21st century cures, and we have TEFCA and things like that. But many of them have a carve out for PHI, right? Which is what we're mostly dealing with in the most part is PHI. Across the world, that is not the same case. And so for us, we just want to, like you said, ensure that we are 100% compliant with those rules. And once again, it's a lot of research, right? We have lawyers and they have to read everybody's law, and then they have to decide, is that law and what we do going to be copacetic, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's a big effort. It's not a small claim to make, right? That you're ready to support international organizations in healthcare anywhere across the world.
And a lot of it has to do with the whole concept of cross-bordering, right? Because we do have plenty of groups in Europe that use Mirth Connect and are GDPR compliant. And as a matter of fact, we've made changes to the application to make it, right?
Because it is true today. We have production Mirth Connect customers live in more than 40 countries who are commercial clients as well. So international is a thing we definitely care about. We have clients all over Europe and South America and Asia and the Middle East. In really all continents, we have people using Mirth Connect. So we know this is a thing we care about and want to do. All right. So Curtis, beyond just that international piece, beyond Command Center, with this 4.6 release, I want to kind of get our listeners really here as we're wrapping up. What are the things? We talked about FHIR, we talked about APIs and what's new in Interop today, but how do you think organizations today are addressing or assessing, I should say, their interop needs? What is it they're looking for in interop today that might be a little bit different than what they were looking for in interop previously? And then how do we in the Mirth world help fill that need? What are they looking for and how do we help fill that need today?
I think a lot of it is everybody wants to talk about AI, and I'm excited about AI, to be completely honest. I'm super excited about what AI can do, but I think we still have to focus on the plumbing, right? Because you can have the best water treatment plant in the world, but if the water can't get to my house, to my sink, where my toothbrush is ready to, then what's the point? Right. And so I think a lot of times we like to chase shiny objects, but today it's a lot of just working within the parameters of the systems that we work with, right? If you're working with an EHR that can only do HL7, great. Mirth is there to help you do HL7. I can't tell you how many things we do where someone gives us a flat file, some sort of CSV or TSV or something like that. We convert it into an HL7 message and send it into an interface. Or we're taking HL7 messages and converting them to FHIR objects and putting them into a FHIR API or to a proprietary API. And even we're starting to get into more things that are far more interesting, like Kafka or streaming services like Apache, those kinds of things where we're starting to stream events. And I think eventually that's the really thing I think is going to be really interesting in healthcare in the next few years. Is right now everything's kind of query and retrieve, right? Or there is push. I'm really excited for the concept of like subpub, right? And I'm super excited to see that, because now I want to get an RSS feed of all of my data, right? Here's Curtis's data, and that RSS feed, I can give a link to my provider and he can now subscribe to my RSS feed. And I'm using RSS as kind of an example of
we're on a podcast, so it's like you're bringing the podcast
right,
but making it relevant.
But here's the RSS feed of everything that happens with Curtis. So when I'm at my PCP versus when I'm at my heart specialist or whatever, everybody gets they subscribe and then it's published to them, and they don't even have
that
to think about it.
It's for app developers, right? Like subscribing for updates is just a nice pattern for APIs to enable. Right, to publish updates on events people care about. So definitely that's really cool. And so what you're saying is your interop strategy, as if you're looking for an interop capability, it has to be able to do the basics, the plumbing, right? Get me the water cleanly from the plant, from the filtering. But it also has to be ready for these next use cases, right? The advanced, AI subscriptions. And so it has to be able to do both. And that's a really interesting and a hard challenge for folks to manage. How does Mirth help them do those things?
Well, I think it comes down to the flexibility of Mirth Connect. We've always said that Mirth Connect is the Swiss Army knife of healthcare data integration. And that's something that's been used internally and externally here at Mirth for a long time. And, I'm a proponent. I carry a Leatherman tool in my pocket every day. And it has a screwdriver and a pair of pliers, and it has a pocket knife, right? And Mirth is exactly that. Now, is it the best pair of pliers you've ever used? No. Is it a specialized pair of pliers to take off a snap ring? No. But it's a good pair of pliers. The story, we once went up to my wife's grandmother's house, and she was having trouble with her. This is up in Oregon, so I live in Utah. We drove to Oregon, and she was having trouble with her garbage disposal. I was able to swap her entire garbage disposal out using just the Leatherman that was just in my pocket, right?
I thought you were going to say Mirth Connect.
But Mirth Connect could probably do it too, right? Like
I was going to end the podcast right there. No, but you're exactly right. Like, it's having a flexible tool makes all the difference, right? You're not locked in. I think it's a developer-friendly tool for healthcare developers. You can build integrations, deploy them, monitor them, and support the whole life cycle, right? Replace them in years when the new thing comes out. And so
and I'm always amazed by the things that people come up with, right? Like during COVID, we had a lot of people who used Mirth to get from Salesforce, where they had their CRM, down to a BioFire device that only spoke serial and back without implementing a full-on LIS system. Right? So Salesforce sends me an API call. I convert that to literally pulses over a wire that goes to a machine that spins the blood around or does whatever it does and says, you do or do not have COVID, comes back as pulses on the wire, and then gets converted to JSON and back up into the cloud. That's amazing.
Yeah, without having to wait for the development of a new standard or new capability, folks were able to get data to where it was needed quickly and easily. And I love that about Mirth. And I'm really excited about us and along with our customers, charting the new path forward for interoperability and for Mirth Connect in this new era where we have, a commercial only product with an enterprise license. I think we now have an obligation to our customers, our users, to continue to put out the best possible product, so that we can have that strong support relationship with all of our end users, and we can have, a great product that meets and exceeds everyone's needs while still having the flexibility, the reliability, the supportability that our customers and our open source users have come to rely on over the course of nearly 20 years. So Curtis, just to close us out here, I want to just say thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. I hope our listeners had a good sense of like what we've been doing with Mirth, what's new in Interop, and what's coming next. And I want to encourage everyone, if you want to learn more about what we're doing here at NextGen, and especially what we're doing with Mirth, definitely check out our website, subscribe to this podcast, which is available in all your feeds and everywhere. And you can get links to it from nextgen.com, and follow us on all the socials, of course, because we're going to keep this conversation going. Hopefully we'll be back to talk more about Interop on this Ambulatory Healthcare Today podcast. But Curtis, I just want to say thank you again so much for joining me. And thank you to all of our listeners, and catch you in the next one. So take care, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Ambulatory Healthcare Today podcast, hosted by NextGen Healthcare. Never miss an episode by subscribing at nextgen.com/podcast. To see a list of products and services tailored for ambulatory care practices, visit nextgen.com.